Going, but definitely not yet gone. The Prime Minister is very reluctantly giving up the highest office in the land. No longer kingpin, but caretaker. Tonight, with the help of a government minister, MPs, peers and political insiders, we explore the last days in office of Boris Johnson, who could be next, and the legacy of one of Britain's most extraordinary politicians.
Prime Minister.
Don't be scared. We'll never change what's been and gone.
We're going to come out of the EU on October the 31st. The herd instinct is powerful. When the herd moves, it moves. And in politics, no one is remotely indispensable.
Boris isn't capable of building that team and providing that unity.
Don't be scared. Your destiny may keep you on. 'Cause all of the stars have faded away. Just try not to worry. You'll see them someday. Take what you need. I'll be on your way. And stop crying your heart out. Get up.
Was having to apologise to the Queen about those parties, was that a moment of shame for you?
I deeply and bitterly regret that happened.
Thank you all very much. Thank you.
Good evening. We have just witnessed one of the most dramatic days in modern British political history. There has never been anything quite like it. Perhaps Boris Johnson was always going to go down in spectacular fashion. Just after 9 o'clock this morning, we found out that the Prime Minister had finally agreed to go after an avalanche of letters telling him explicitly it was all over. But when he addressed the nation at 12:30, it was immediately clear that he believes he's been traduced, the victim of the herd instinct and what he called an eccentric idea to change governments. In a moment, we'll be speaking to a member of the Prime Minister's interim or provisional government and unpicking how it will actually work with Boris Johnson still in charge. But first, our political editor, Nick Watt.
The final countdown as the curtain falls on a short but historic premiership. Bowing out after a cabinet revolt sealed his fate.
I've tried to persuade my colleagues that it would be eccentric to change governments.
Seething that he's been unseated barely 3 years after securing a landslide election victory. But boosterish until the end.
I found so many people possessed of such boundless British originality and so willing to tackle old problems in new ways that I know that even if things can sometimes seem dark now, our future together is golden. Thank you all very much.
This is an excruciating moment for Boris Johnson. The boy who wanted to be world king settled for the rather more modest billet of UK Prime Minister, and that is now ending in flames.
Sadness for his diminished band of supporters.
I am being deeply, deeply shocked by it.
For some, anger.
When he was elected, we all knew who Boris was, which is why he got an 80-seat majority. Which now, people who won their seats and have enjoyed 2 years in the House and everything that goes with it, are now very happy to turn their backs on him. And I wonder whether we'll rue the day this happens.
The Prime Minister will remain in office until his party elects a new leader.
It's a funny old world, isn't it, Nick?
One new minister took office on the understanding that Boris Johnson will act as a caretaker.
The convention is that there's no such thing as an interim Prime Minister. We will have a new party leader, and that party leader will then kiss hands with the Queen. And until that time, the Prime Minister will carry on governing, but as a caretaker. And that is very, very clear. And that is what Cabinet established clearly today.
A leadership contender is staying on board after her overnight call on the Prime Minister to go was heeded.
The Prime Minister is incredibly magnanimous, and it was a great celebration of his phenomenal achievements, and I'm very proud of what the Prime Minister has achieved.
You knew he had to go, but you're obviously sad about that.
I think it was very difficult for him. I think he was a leader of great qualities. He is a leader of great qualities. Remarkable individual.
Kelly Tolhurst, quite a week. Have things calmed down now?
Well, I'm still the Deputy Chief Whip.
You're still the Deputy Chief Whip. Are you the Deputy Chief Whip with enthusiasm?
Yes.
Nigel Farage.
How are you?
And never one to miss a moment.
It all started with such great optimism for Boris Johnson and for Brexiteers. This was exciting. It was supposed to be a new dawn. And it hasn't turned out that way.
Because you were obviously different party to Boris Johnson, but you admired the way he delivered Brexit, didn't you?
Well, look, I mean, I stood down candidates against all the sitting Conservatives. I tried to make it as easy for him as I could. I didn't want a second referendum. I wanted to get Brexit done. The trouble is, it hasn't been done properly.
Raucous on the street, but greater calm in the Conservative Party after the Prime Minister finally threw in the towel. But some Conservative MPs want Boris Johnson to stand down immediately.
I'm naturally pleased that the Prime Minister has announced today that he's going to resign, but I don't think we should be waiting until the autumn. I think that the public want to see that change now. I'm very clear in my mind that I think the Deputy Prime Minister should take over from him imminently, whilst there is a leadership process that takes place where that will return a new leader in the early autumn.
It was a sad day. It was a necessary day. His government had run its course, but it's always sad when it comes to an end.
One senior figure believes the Prime Minister is following the right path.
The convention is, recently over the past 20 or so years, is that the membership have a say in picking our party leader. If we're going to do that, and we are, because that's what the rules demand, then it is inevitable that there's going to be a 6 to 8 week hiatus at minimum before the new party leader is selected, because once we get to the final two candidates, they have to go before the membership. There'll be hustings around the country, as there was in 2019 between Boris and Jeremy. So as long as you have both parties, Labour and Conservatives, have their members having the final say in the party leader, you are locked into a fairly long time frame.
A familiar circus rolls into town as a most unconventional premiership crashes down to earth.
And Nick joins me now from outside the Spectator magazine summer party. Nick, you have more news on that timetable.
Yes, the news that I have is it's looking highly likely that the election for the leadership of the Conservative Party will start in the middle of next week. The idea is that Conservative MPs will start voting in the middle of next week and that they will conclude their stage of voting by the 21st of July, which is when Parliament rises for the summer recess. What they would do is sort of whittle the list down to two. There would be the final two candidates and they would go before the Conservative membership in the country. The idea is that they would then elect the new leader who would be in place by the 5th of September, which is when Parliament returns for 2 weeks before the party conferences. Now, the significance of that is much, much faster than people had expected. And senior figures are saying that they hope that the speed of that will reassure those Conservative MPs who are so distrustful of Boris Johnson that they want him out right now. Important to say that this decision does need to be finalised and agreed by the new executive of the Backbench 1922 committee, which will be elected on Monday, but it is highly likely that it'll happen that way.
Well, this is very early days. Lots of people haven't even declared their hand, but who do you think is going to win?
Well, there were 3 potential candidates at the Spectator Summer Party tonight. We had Rishi Sunak, the former Chancellor, Nadhim Zahawi, the new Chancellor, and Tom Tugendhat, who is the chairman of the Foreign Affairs Select Committee in Parliament. But there will be many, many contenders, many runners and riders. There'll be some well-known ones, Liz Truss, Ben Wallace and Suella Braverman. There'll be some not-so-well-known ones, people like Kemi Badenoch. But, you know, Kirsty, rule number 1 of a Conservative leadership contest, the front runner never wins. And interestingly, not that long ago, in the party behind us, I was talking to one Conservative grandee who will be at the heart of this. They know a lot about the Conservative Party. I said, who is going to win? They looked up to the twilight of the summer evening and they said, I have absolutely no idea. Kirsty.
Thanks very much, indeed. Well, I'm joined now by Robert Courts, a Transport Minister who is not one of those who resigned from the government. Thank you very much for joining us. You stayed put when dozens of others did not. Look at what happened at Levelling Up. Look at what happened in education. There was nobody about. It was like tumbleweed. Is every post now filled? Is the government fully functional?
Yes, the government is fully functional. My understanding is that every post either is now filled or will very shortly be filled. I mean, of course, these decisions take place way above my pay grade, but that process will be taking place now.
So why did you not resign? In fact, you never said a word. And did you think that Boris Johnson's conduct over Chris Pincher was beyond reproach?
Oh, look, I really understand how upset everybody was about the Chris Pincher episode. I entirely understand. I mean, there is a regular...
But not you.
No, I mean, I understand entirely why everyone was so upset. I mean, the question, of course, I have to take, and it's a judgment call for everybody here, is that I still think there's important things that I needed to get on with doing in terms of my own job. I mean, I'm the Transport Minister, I'm the Transport Security Minister.
Presumably the Chancellor did too. You know, he's got a cost of living crisis. You know, there's there's lots of things going on that people felt this was terribly important, and therefore principle took precedence here, but you didn't.
Well, it's a matter for everybody, of course, to take their view as to what they decide to do, and I'm not criticising anybody who took a different view from me. I simply took the view that their party has a process which is there, which enables the leadership to be changed if that's what people want to happen.
If other people call for it, but not you.
No, I mean, the party process is there, it's straightforward. I took the view that I was going to carry on with my duty and my job because I thought that was the right thing to do.
Well, finally, parliamentarians have got rid of the Prime Minister on moral grounds. But generally, don't you think, you should all apologise for facilitating the man that your party is now turfed out of office? I mean, because in fact, you did facilitate.
Well, look, I think the Prime Minister's achieved an enormous amount. I don't think there's anybody else who would have been able to break the deadlock that we had in 2018 and 2019, leading us through the pandemic with all the amazing difficulties that there were, but particularly the vaccine rollout. That was very much due to his credit. So he's achieved some incredible things. And, clearly, of course, it's time for a change now. And I think he's done the right thing. But I don't think that means that we should lose sight of what he has achieved, which is very significant. You'll
have heard Chris Loder, the MP there, saying that actually, no, let's not have any kind of caretaker business. Let's get him out now. Would that not have been a better plan?
No, I don't think so, because I think there needs to be some stability. I mean, it's for much the same reason.
And you think Boris Johnson's going to create stability in the next 3 months?
I think we need to have good governance. We need to continue. Those of us who are in ministerial posts need to make sure we continue to do our jobs so that the people of Britain get what they expect, which is stability and good governance. And then the process that the party has, which is well understood, will take its course.
So no new policies, we understand. Let's talk about 2 policies that are problematic for areas of the party. Sending refugees for Rwanda. Is that going to go ahead, or is that going to be parked till the new Prime Minister comes in?
Well, the policies that are in place already are the ones that will still exist. I mean, the Prime Minister has made quite clear there won't be any big policy changes. So if that policy is in place now, it will continue, and any big changes that would be taken, obviously I don't know what those would be. Those would be matters for a new Prime Minister, will be announced when that time comes.
And what about the Northern Ireland Protocol? Legislation is due to come forward on Tuesday. There may be an incoming Prime Minister who wants to take a different attitude to the protocol rather than actually dismantling a lot of it. Or is it going to go ahead?
So I think, those clearly will be matters for that new Prime Minister.
Yes, so the Northern Ireland Protocol will get parked.
Well, my understanding, the short answer is that because this isn't my departmental brief, I don't know. You'd have to ask someone else for the definite what the programme of the government is going to be. So I don't have the answer to that. But we'll be looking to make sure that the issues that exist with the Northern Ireland Protocol are resolved.
Let's just take a scenario. What happens if in 6 weeks' time, or even less, Boris Johnson calls in his closest allies, he says he's at a change of heart, he announces an election. Now, this is not entirely a fantasy. One Conservative MP has put this possibility to us. Are you absolutely 100% sure He's not going to turn turtle and do something else.
I really don't think that's very likely. He's been absolutely clear today about what he's going to do and the decision that he's taken. And of course, as is quite rightly always the case, anything he does will be scrutinised by all of us and by all of you.
And you would never try and support that if he tried to change his mind?
I just don't think it's something that's
you would
likely.
Support it, would you?
There's a very straightforward...
But you wouldn't support it?
I'm not going to speculate about something that strikes me as wholly speculative.
OK, so who are you backing for leadership?
Well, look, I think we need someone because of the challenges that the country has, because of the fact we're still pulling out of the pandemic, because of all the cost of living issues that you quite rightly referred to. I think we need someone who's got experience. I think we've got to need someone who is able to campaign. I think we need someone who's able to deliver. So someone like Grant Shapps would be a great choice. Yeah, my boss, Grant Shapps. I've seen him working at close quarters, and I know he did an outstanding job. Or perhaps someone like Ben Wallace, who's got a lot of experience as well.
Thank you very much indeed. Well, what is Boris Johnson made of? He created a unique space for himself in British politics. For so long, a semi-detached backbencher, then a charismatic London mayor, he propelled himself from the Tory frontbench with plenty of torque from his one-time, well, two-time friend Michael Gove into Downing Street. He wooed droves of die-hard Labour voters, got Brexit done, and all the while appeared to have a cast-iron belief in himself. Here's Lewis Goodall.
We did it! We did it! We pulled it off, didn't we? It is clearly now the will of the Parliamentary Conservative Party that there should be a new leader of that party and therefore a new Prime Minister.
How did it come to this?
And I want you to know how sad I am to be giving up the best job in the world. But them's the breaks.
He was supposed to be a political magician. He was supposed to last 10 years. He was supposed to make politics anew, and he did, in lots of ways. But most notably of all, he did so by being central in bringing down 3 Conservative Prime Ministers, his 2 immediate predecessors.
Thank you.
And then ultimately, himself.
Release the rings into position now.
Boris Johnson was a politician of the age. He wrote its script. In an era of spin, of politicians looking alike, he would stand out. He was himself. He could be no other. But who was that self? He was a riddle on the stage. The Eton Tribune of the people, the liberal London mayor, citizen of nowhere, who became the champion of the somewheres. A steel resolve, an ironclad self-belief, covered in a coating of carefully rehearsed chaos.
If any other politician anywhere in the world got stuck on a zip wire, it would be, disastrous. For Boris, it'll be an absolute triumph.
His was a consequential political life.
I will be advocating vote Leave, or whatever the team is called.
He inherited a political stasis, a broken politics, broken partly at his own hand, but that he fixed, perhaps the only he could fix. He crafted a new, albeit creaky, Brexit settlement, where once none seemed possible.
He will be seen as a historic Prime Minister in spite of this dramatic and deserved fall for delivering at least partially Brexit and leading that Brexit campaign, and of course for being Prime Minister during the pandemic. He will write a history of his premiership for sure, but many others will for years to come, because it marks a significant and seismic shift in Britain's place in the world. So yeah, he is a more historic Prime Minister than some of those who served for much longer on those grounds alone.
Statement, the Prime Minister.
But consequential premierships linger long.
Our mission is to deliver Brexit.
A Brexit settlement incomplete, one which has destabilised Northern Ireland, the biggest Tory victory since 1987, but at the cost of a coalition which is often at odds with itself, and then the unique legacy for party and country of how he would govern, the clues for which were there from the earliest days.
The decision to advise Her Majesty to prorogue Parliament was unlawful.
I cannot think of a Prime Minister who has tested so many different aspects of our constitution and our democracy and caused such controversy over time. There have been plenty that have left in controversial circumstances. There have been plenty that have an element of populism to them or bring huge controversy to our country. But I can't think of one that has been quite the experience we've had with Boris Johnson.
It was 3 years beset by scandal, and uniquely in modern politics, he resigns not over policy or politics or an election, but probity. Not since Lloyd George has there been a period where the Prime Minister's character and integrity, his relationship with the truth, has so dominated politics.
He was said to be a Prime Minister who could defy political gravity, and in many ways he did and he could, although not necessarily in the ways you might think. He had tremendous political capital. He had the opportunity through Brexit and through COVID to reimagine the British state, and yet in the end he squandered. He burnt through that capital in short order, and those opportunities came to little. And that's partly because of another Boris Johnson contradiction, that he was the leader of a so-called people's government, wresting back control from Britain's political elites who had gone wrong, and yet in the end was perceived and to have been adjudged to so consistently do that thing that elites so often do, to think that the rules just don't apply to them.
I hereby declare that the said Boris Johnson is duly elected.
Boris Johnson, like his hero Churchill, believed in the great man theory of history, that it was along the axis of great figures that history is plotted. His own political life was, to some extent at least, a vindication of that view of history. It mattered that Boris Johnson was there when he was. Pericles, another of his heroes, once said that famous men have the whole earth as their memorial. For good or ill, the Britain that we're in will be Boris Johnson's.
This good or well, Brexit is done, kind of, and the country is yet to be levelled up. So what will a post-Boris Conservative agenda look like? I'm joined now by the former Conservative Education Secretary, Justine Greening, Conservative MP John Barron and Lord Vasey, a Culture Minister in David Cameron's government. Good evening to you all. First of all, Justine Greening, this is about truth-telling and also about restoring trust. Do you think, as a former minister, do you think that Boris Johnson should go right now?
Yes, I do. I think a lot of people will be confused about how you can be a Prime Minister who resigns and then essentially appoints yourself as a caretaker Prime Minister and appoints your new cabinet as that caretaker Prime Minister. And I think for the party in particular, as well as the country, this is about moving on. And therefore, whilst Boris is still at number 10, and I can understand the arguments people are making for that, but whilst that is still the case, it's harder for the party and the country to move on.
Do you think he'll be able to resist tweaking a policy, making a move, doing something that's controversial that pushes his own agenda?
Well, I think that's the contradiction, because he said he won't be making any big decisions. But this is a time when we do need some big decisions quite possibly being made around cost of living in the run-up to the autumn, Ukraine. And of course, if he's not making any big decisions, then it begs the question as to what's the problem with handing over to a different caretaker Prime Minister that can begin to bring the party back together and start to build those bridges with the wider country.
Even in these 3 months, he couldn't restore some of his, well, I don't know, his credibility and try and bring the party. There's nothing he could say that Boris Johnson himself could say which would help bring the party back together.
I think it's hard to see that, Kirsty, actually, and I think that's why he's found himself in this position tonight.
Well, Ed Vasey, you have known Boris Johnson for many, many years. He did reshape the Tory party vote, but I wonder, without Boris Johnson at the helm, will some of that support ebb away? Some of that support that came from the Red Wall people that had never considered voting
Yeah, I think
Tory
it will.
before.
I mean, I think that, I have been sort of carried along by events today, and I initially thought, Dominic Raab should be caretaker Prime Minister, but I think it's fine for Boris to act as caretaker, just as David Cameron did. But I think that, I think it was Richard Drax you had in your VT saying, the Tory party's done a terrible thing. This always happens when the Tory party actively gets rid of a leader. Really, the last time was Margaret Thatcher in terms of actively removing a leader.
Did you see any alternative?
And what it leaves a great deal of dissatisfaction with the membership of the Conservative Party because they feel they've chosen a leader and it's been taken away from them. But it also leaves a great deal of dissatisfaction with the voters who feel they voted for a Prime Minister. Now, I know we cavil against Boris pretending that he's a president, but it is the case that his personal brand took the Tories to a big majority, and there will be a chunk of the electorate that resent the fact that the Prime Minister they voted for has been removed.
Do you think he should have been removed?
Well, that's a...
Yes or no?
Well, yes, in the sense that it was too late for him.
Oh, well, John Barron, let me turn to you, because obviously as an MP, today it was very clear that Boris Johnson thought that he had delivered the majority of 80, personally. And obviously he was very discomforted at being removed. He made no secret of that. He wasn't being emollient, he wasn't apologising. Was there anything for you troubling in that speech?
Well, he quite clearly made the point that it was down to largely a personal victory, and to a certain extent perhaps it was. But I think what we're discussing here is something much more important. I mean, let's be clear, he has achieved a lot. But for many of us on the backbenchers, the integrity of Parliament is paramount. And, I resigned or withdrew my support from him when the Sue Gray report clearly laid bare the extent of rule breaking, and then it was beyond credibility to believe that he didn't know it was going on. So truth and honour is important in politics, and if we desert that principle, we're on a very slippery
So do you think in these coming months when we have these leadership election hustings and so forth, is there a need to re-establish what conservatism is actually about?
Well, yes, to a certain extent. I mean, many achievements, but we have taxation at a 40-year high. We have many policies that we need to revisit. But I come back to that point that, we have got to make sure that we have integrity at the heart of government. You cannot be flippant with the truth in Parliament. I mean, I served in the army, and it reminded us that you serve to lead and you lead by example, and that's what's been lacking with Boris at number 10, and particularly when he's been describing events at the dispatch box.
That is so interesting then, because then the voters, the MPs first of all, then the membership, are going to have to make up their minds. Is what they're voting for a person whose policies are entirely aligned with their own views, or are they voting for somebody who's morally impeccable? Because can you afford to do one without the other?
Well, it's not. It shouldn't be black and white. It shouldn't be an either or. You should have a Prime Minister and ministers in position who do have integrity and are pursuing the right Conservative policies, including lower taxation.
Well, that Justine Greening begs the question then, what leader are you looking for, in the sense that would it be possible for somebody who had been a Remainer to be the Prime Minister of the Conservative, be the leader of the Conservative Party and the Prime Minister right now? Brexit isn't entirely done with the Northern Ireland Protocol. Do you think there is a bar, not obviously a formal bar, to a former Remainer?
I think unless the party can move on from what was a very divisive debate. Brexit has happened. We have had the referendum. We are out of the EU. The debate is now about how you can make Brexit best work. So the reality is the question facing the Conservative Party is how it can deliver levelling up, which is this agenda that I think can unite a whole country.
And you don't think it's been problematic so far in uniting the country? I mean, levelling up sounded like a great thing.
And it's been problematic because it's been pitched as essentially a northern agenda. I understand that because I'm originally from Rotherham in South Yorkshire, but I represented Putney in London, and there are parts of our city right here that suffer from huge deprivation. So it's about having a national agenda.
What is more important? What is more important than Brexit and Remain and all the rest of it? Brexit is done. We're moving forward on that, trade deals, etc., etc. But what is more important is going back to core Conservative principles of lower taxation in order to create greater prosperity to help the less fortunate in society.
That's what we need to do. John's voice is the most important in this discussion, and it's fascinating to hear him go on about low taxation, because clearly there's going to be a big constituency in the Commons who are the ones who get the vote. I mean, it's amazing that members of the House of Lords don't get a vote in this. But and clearly low taxation is going to be a thing. I do not agree with Justine on levelling up, because I think this government hasn't had a chance to pursue a domestic agenda because of COVID, because of the cost of living crisis, because of Ukraine, and I do think that the Conservative Party is now a Brexit party. That is just the be-all and end-all, and the only person who can lead the Conservative Party at the moment for the foreseeable future is somebody who was an original Brexiteer. That's just a fact. I happen to be a Remainer. I think Brexit has been a disaster. I would love to vote for Remainer, but in reality, when the trouble starts with the Tory party, you need a Brexiteer at the helm, and even a Brexiteer will still be considered by Brexiteers
and of course,
not a pure Brexiteer.
What you've got is a party membership who's more pro-Brexit.
Yes, but may I suggest, Ed, I think we do need to move beyond this debate.
I don't think you can at the moment.
Well, what I hope we see is that there's an awful lot of experience and talent on the backbenches.
Yes.
I really do think that. It's because of the backbenchers, for example, that, we've argued against HS2, we argued against a lot of the foolish foreign Middle Eastern interventions. We gave the electorate a vote on the referendum. And I hope that in this leadership contest, they're going to coalesce more and more backbenchers are going to come forward and present themselves as leaders of the
Very
party.
briefly, Justin.
Winning elections is about winning a battle for the future. Brexit is done. The reality is, unless you can reach out to young people through the levelling up agenda in places like London, as well as in the north, then the party will not have a winning coalition for the next general election.
Yes.
That's
And
the real
John Barron,
piece.
just very, very briefly, what's the most urgent thing on the table for a new Prime Minister?
I think cost of living crisis. I think we need to bring taxation down. I think we need to help the less fortunate in society.
Thank you all very much indeed. Well, if the temperature at Westminster was off the scale today, how's the heat been reflected in the country? Our UK editor, Seema Kotecha, has been to the Conservative marginal seat of Reading West.
Excuse me, sir. Sorry to disturb. I'm from BBC Newsnight. Just wondering what you think about Boris Johnson resigning today.
I want him to go. He's a pain in the arse.
Everyone's got something to say about it.
He's an idiot. He can't do anything right. This is just going on the telly.
I do appreciate that it's not the nicest job to have in the world. So I kind of feel sorry for the person, but I don't get involved in the politics.
The world of Westminster, with its intrigue, plotting and alliances, is a world away from towns and cities like this. A cynical shrug, politicians are all the same, sums up how some feel as they struggle with their own domestic issues and the cost of living crisis.
Like, prices are going up on stuff. Like, people can't live anymore, do you know what I mean? Like, you have to either, even if you go to work, like, you're coming home with a minimum wage and you can't even afford to still live, do you know what I mean? You can't even afford to put like £4 on your electric these days.
Well, I hope that everything changes in regards to living costs and the circumstances that's going on at the moment. Yeah, it's really bad. People are suffering. We have homeless in the UK. It shouldn't be happening.
But of course, politics matters. It has the power to change. That opportunity is now in the minds of many.
The public seems to be focused on Partygate and things like that, let alone what's going on in the rest of the world. Ukraine, climate, finance, the cost of living, so many things to worry about.
Reading West is Alok Sharma's constituency, which he won by a modest 4,000 votes. The Tory, who serves in the cabinet, has been MP of this marginal seat since 2010. Prior to that, it was in Labour hands.
Do you want this to take away, or you want to... Yeah?
At this cafe, political happenings won't necessarily change voting habits.
Boris in himself is just a guy that I think many years ago everyone sort of quite liked and knew him as the mayor, and he seemed to be quite jolly, a little bit different, not as formal and serious. And then, all of a sudden he becomes leader, which actually shocked me at the time. But actually, the last few months have just been quite incredible, haven't they, really?
With everything that's happened in politics in recent months and weeks, is that going to influence the way you vote going forward?
Not really, because I think it is very much Boris. I think everything about what has happened was very personal. It was his fault. It was the way he spoke, presents himself, the lies. Somebody else could have done similar lies, etc. But the rest of his whole character and being, to me, is just not the right person. So no, it wouldn't necessarily change my views. I did vote Conservative last year, and I wouldn't not.
Reading made its name for the 3 Bs: biscuits, beer and bulbs. Their view of another B, Boris Johnson, and his end-of-term report could help shape the political future here, a microcosm of so many other constituencies across this country.
The marginal Reading West, that was Seema Katech. Well, I'm joined now by Camilla Tominey, the Associate Editor of The Telegraph, the longest-serving MP, the Father of the House, Peter Bottomley, and Ash Sarkar, a contributing editor at Novara Media. Good evening to you all. Camilla Tominey, how do you think this could play out? We've got a caretaker, we could divide the party. Do you think that we're going to get all the way to September?
Well, the only thing I could establish in the House of Commons today as I was chatting to MPs is they want an expedited first process of the leadership race. So they want to get down to 2 candidates before they break up for the summer recess, which is a week on Wednesday. John Major had suggested in his letter to Sir Graham Brady, chairman of the 1922 committee, that they should cut out the membership having a say in the next PM altogether. But I think there are senior figures, David Davis, I quoted in a piece of The Telegraph, saying that's madness because the members still haven't forgiven the MPs for not allowing them a say on Theresa May. And also the successor is going to have some really big decisions to make, and that person needs the support not just of the parliamentary party but the party as a whole, I would imagine.
Do you agree with Ed Vaizey? There's absolutely no chance that anyone who is not a rock solid Brexiteer will actually get the leadership.
That's true. And I think, it's all very well saying, the country was 52-48. The Tory party was about 80-20 in favour of Brexit. So the idea of there being a non-leave successor, I think, is for the birds. Even those who now claim to have embraced Brexit, like Liz Truss, I think might come unstuck on that basis.
Ash, I mean, if you look at, what Boris Johnson did, he was instrumental in creating swathes of new Conservative voters. Now, are they simply going to return to Labour, or do you think, we heard there, it wasn't just about Boris Johnson, the woman who voted, it was talked to last, she actually voted for Boris Johnson, but she would vote Conservative again?
Well, what we've seen already with the loss of Wakefield just last month is that the Tories aren't doing well in those key red wall battleground seats. And I think that there were, of course, reasons that weren't just Boris Johnson that those red wall seats turned blue in 2019. There was a steadily declining vote share for Labour since 2001. But what really got it over the line was a depressed Labour vote in 2019 and big spending promises from Boris Johnson. The idea was you're going to get a hospital, you're going to get some funding for your council, you're going to get a school upgrade. Now everyone's talking about low tax, which also for lots of people is going to mean reduced public spending in an impoverished area. Might work well for the Tory grassroots, but what's that going to mean for ordinary people?
Well, Peter Bottomley, as the Father of the House, you saw that Boris Johnson did bring a coalition of the willing and indeed the unwilling together. I mean, do you think a future leader will be able to do that, or was that quite an exceptional thing?
It wasn't exceptional. Margaret Thatcher did it, John Major did it, and remember in 1992 when the Tories got the highest vote for an awful long time, in fact probably ever, and he did that without the media noticing, without any of the informed commentators noticing. And people just liked him and thought he was speaking for them. So whoever does lead the Tory party needs to have MPs and canvassers and candidates who will do the same thing. So it's not just a leader. Boris Johnson did well in 2019, but the votes he got, also we lost votes. And recently we've lost Wandsworth and Westminster and Worthing as town councils. We need to get them back. And I think we need to have people who will build on what Boris Johnson did for good and try to make it last.
So if you've got John Barron saying that the people, it is also about trust and so forth, that now moving forward there'll have to be a kind of reset in order to say, actually, we have somebody who is of probity, who's upstanding, who's not going to ever tell untruths?
Well, there's that, and I hope we can take that reasonably for granted. If we make a mistake, say so. When I first became minister, my Secretary of State said, Tom King, carry out responsibilities. When you make a mistake, be the first person to tell me. If you think you're going to make a mistake, let's do it together. But I think the other issue is policy. And if we can have a leader who will say, why on earth are we mucking around with Channel 4, having its most successful series of years? Why do we squeeze the BBC on the licence fee in the idea that it's going to change the standard of living for people? Why don't we get on with trying to resolve the Northern Ireland issue in a way that the EU...
And the refugee issue?
And the EU's 27 will agree with. And the refugee one is one where the idea we want to send lots of people around is wrong. The question how you stop people flooding across the channel, putting themselves at risk and jumping queues. So those are proper issues which need proper consideration.
Well, Camilla Tominey, you were at the Spectator party tonight. I mean, what are you hearing? What about the people that might be the front runners? Who do you think could be front runners?
Well, certainly a squabble about whether Boris Johnson should stay on or go. And secondly...
stay on for the caretaker.
Yes, exactly.
And
some people calling him...
What were the concerns about
saying that, you know, actually... a clean break is needed and he should go next week, and what does he think he's staying around for?
Also, to be fair, he's staying around for?
Well, I think he's staying around because he feels that he might be able to restore his reputation by steadying the ship, you know. But and equally, I suppose there is this sense that Dominic Raab has ruled himself out of the actual race, and therefore he could be interim. But we're coming to the summer recess, so up until that point, there's going to be the leadership race, then 2 candidates, and it goes to the membership. So he has to just hold on during the summer because it's going to the membership and there's hustings and a campaign to take place. But I think in terms of the people are talking about, you know, Rishi Sunak's very much back in the fray, despite his complicated non-dom and other status. And there are some dark horse candidates, you know, Suella Braverman's being talked about.
Well, she's talked about it.
Well, she's talked about it. Kemi Badenoch, I think, has this evening come out saying she'll put herself forward. So these aren't household names, are they? They aren't the big beasts that are on the front.
And I wonder, Asaka, who do you think the left fears most?
I mean, to be honest, the left isn't really in this game because they're not powerful within the Labour Party anymore. The trouble for Keir Starmer is that he made personality the big defining line between him and Boris Johnson. I'm an honest man, I've got integrity, I've got a different style of governance. That can all come a cropper if A, the Durham police hit the big red chaos button and issue a fixed penalty notice, or B, the Tories go for someone really boring. The thing that I would add to all of this is that it is bananas that some of the most important questions concerning our democracy bypass the electorate entirely. We've got a leadership pitch, which isn't just a leadership pitch, it will be a prime ministerial pitch being made to a handful of people who happen to be Conservative Party MPs or members, and all of this horse trading is going on at the Spectator Garden Party where Boris Johnson used to be minister. This is elite parlor.
Well, on that note, we're just about to finish, but I just want to ask you too, do you think there's any chance of an election this year, Peter Bottom?
Absolutely none at all. But one thing the new leader will have to do is to build the Tory party to be an effective campaigning organisation, no matter who is the leader, because we win elections on the ground, in towns, in villages, in cities.
Camilla, very quickly, do you think there'll be election? No election. Thank you all very much indeed. Just a quick romp through the papers, and they all have the front page picture the same. Boris Johnson giving his wife Carrie a kiss and his son Wilf at his side. Boris is cast out by a party in a grip of collective hysteria. Keir Starmer's cock-a-hoop corks are popping in Brussels and in Moscow. The Sun, same picture on the front page. Kiss goodbye and thanks for Brexit, Boris, says the Sun. The Telegraph, PM's long goodbye leaves the UK in a state of paralysis. Well, that's all from us on this remarkable day. Victoria Darbyshire will be here tomorrow. From all of us here, a very good night. Goodbye.